Yeah.
Okay. Hello. Hello. I just want to start by saying that this is the first time I've spoken to more than 3 people in about 12 months, so you'll have to bear with me while I try and remember how to do that. I'm sure I'll be doing lots of ridiculous hand gestures and mumbling and sounding very uncomfortable, which is what I am, because I'm a game developer and I'm not used to talking to so many people. So just a little background there. My name is Phil. Myself and Ollie, we used to work at a company called Frontier Developments. I was a lead designer there. Ollie was a coder. It was about 7 years. And we left at the beginning of last year to start our own independent studio, which is called Ghost Town Games. We actually brought the very first prototype of our game, Overcooked, to the Norwich Game Festival last year. So this is a little bit of a homecoming for us. For anyone who doesn't know, the game we've made is called Overcooked. It is a cooperative cooking game for 1 to 4 players, and it is out. It's actually out there on the floor if you want to go and give it a go after this, and it's due to be released in the next few months. So when we were asked to give a talk, we agreed, largely because it's been our experience that doing something that terrifies you is usually one of the first steps to having any kind of success. That, or it's one of the first steps to getting food poisoning, but you generally end up with a pretty good story. So we agreed, and we had to think about what we would talk about, and we realised that we haven't actually done a great deal over the past 12 months. We've been largely heads down making the game, so that really narrowed things down for us. And that's what the talk's going to be about, basically our experience over the past 12 months, setting up the studio, making the game, promoting it, and all the trials and tribulations that come with that. In the hope that if anyone out there is thinking of doing the same or has an interest in it, that there might be at least a nugget of information that you can take away from this garbled, wobbled mess of a talk. These talks are kind of weird for me because we've been in the position where last year, were coming to a lot of talks and listening to people talking about setting up studios and taking lots of notes ourselves. It's kind of like, it's a weird analogy, but it's like that scene in Bill and Ted. If anyone who hasn't seen Bill and Ted, there's a scene where Ted, I said to Ollie, this is a terrible idea to do this little anecdote.
I love this bit. This is my favourite bit.
There's a scene in Bill and Ted where Ted meets a version of himself from the future, and the future version of himself says, oh, by the way, when you get to now, you should remember to wind back your watch. And the events of the film carry out, and Ted of the past becomes the Ted of the future and realises, oh, actually, I forgot to wind back my watch. I better remind myself from the past to do it. And that's kind of how it feels with these talks. We've been to so many of them, and we took so many notes in the early days. And then we went away and we made the game, and then we're like, oh, wait, what about all that great advice we had? Right, let's get up on stage and give that back to people now in the hope that maybe they won't make the same mistakes we did. So what I basically said there is that the talk's going to be pretty pointless, but let's plough on anyway. Right, Ollie, take over.
Yes.
Prototype.
Sure. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the genesis of Overcooked and why we came into independent gaming in the first place. So, as Phil says, we had 7 years at Frontier. And during that time, we, at lunchtimes, would gather together to play cooperative local co-op games, which has been a really big focus of ours. I think it's very important when you're working as an independent developer to have something that you yourself really would want to play, because you're going to be doing this day in, day out for a whole year, and it needs to be something that you enjoy playing, but also it has to be something you think is worth that time and that kind of investment, because we're like obviously taking a huge risk, so you want to do that. So we were playing games like Gang Beasts. I was a big fan of Gang Beasts, and there's a game called Storage Inc. actually, which you actually heard of Storage Inc. That's great. No, I love Storage Inc. Storage Inc. is you're playing as these little forklift trucks, and it's an Xbox back in the days of XNA indie channel games. It's a great one. So we're playing a lot of games like that, and we were looking for cooperative games that allowed players all to sort of. So if you're playing a game like Diablo, you have this problem that the player in front is getting a lot of the gameplay, and they're sort of ploughing ahead, and the players behind them are kind of trailing behind. And we wanted something that was more sort of equal and universal local co-op. So that's what we set out to do. That was our mission. So one of the pieces of advice is to find the sort of core experience that you want from a game, and to sort of focus down on that, because the most dangerous thing you can do as an independent developer is to try to do too much. You have to pick something that is important, and then you have to build everything else around that concept, and you have to prioritize anything that brings that forward. This is why Overcooked is primarily a cooperative game. It is a local cooperative game, and the reason is because we really wanted to focus on that, the spirit of cooperation. So so we set out and we put together our prototype, which we brought to Norwich. One of the other pieces of advice that we received fairly early on and is quite useful is to get a prototype in front of people as early as possible. One of the reason for that is you want a prototype that, when you're presenting it to people, you have the opportunity to go away and change things about your game. So what you don't want to do is go away and silo yourself off and develop a game and then think, no, this is amazing, and then bring it in front of everybody and then discover that it wasn't fun because you've just spent 12 months developing it. So you need to have that experience. And coming to Norwich last year was a really big deal for us, for finding the usability changes we needed to make to Overcooked, and we could prioritize those early, knowing that for us, our game being about loads of little chefs, I don't know if anyone really knows much about Overcooked, but you're playing as lots of little chefs and you're dealing with these ingredients coming across the screen. It involves a lot of small tasks that you have to do, chopping ingredients and putting them in pots and that kind of thing. And there was a lot of stuff to do with combining those ingredients and what players were doing that was unexpected. There was a bit where players threw away the fire extinguisher and when they set the kitchen on fire, it was like, oh, okay, that's the thing the players are going to try and do. And there was all sorts of things to do with what was confusing and what wasn't confusing to players, which Norwich has been particularly good for bringing in people who aren't necessarily gamers, which is obviously a big priority for us, is to get people who have a wide variety of different skill levels. And if you play against another piece of advice we received really early was to not play against other developers or play with other developers as much as you play with complete random players, because developers play a game like no one plays games like developers play games. Developers will play a game very analytically, and they'll know they know there's a lot of assumptions to do with game playing that you kind of bring to the table that you don't even realize you're doing. Whereas if you're playing it against players, and particularly players who don't necessarily play lots and lots of games, then you find out what really is user-friendly and what isn't user-friendly. That gets us to the sort of point where we brought a prototype to Norwich, and we came here and we sort of did our run of a day of it, and we also did a lot of user testing with friends, which is very useful, and it was important to take lots and lots of notes on all that, find all of the different issues of the game, and then go away to develop it, which kind of takes us into pre-production, really, which is, I suppose, our jump into pre-production.
All right. So as I say, in the early days, we went to lots of talks and we sent lots of emails, anyone we could think of, basically. Having worked in the industry for 8 years, we knew a fair few people who had done similar things, so we plied them all with alcohol and tea and picked their brains. And what I will say is if anyone's considering doing something like this, then you really shouldn't be afraid to email as many people as possible. The worst you're going to get is no response at all, and generally we found most people to be really receptive, and you'll get something back even if it's not the most helpful thing in the world. So once we'd done that and we sort of had a lay of the land and we had a big horrible to-do list, we had to start with some of the more practical tasks. So the first thing we had to do was come up with a name for the company and for the game, because we wanted to hit the ground running with website and Twitter and email. So we knew we needed to nail that pretty quickly, which again, it was kind of daunting because you're aware that when you come up with a name for the company and for the game, that's something that you're going to be saying over and over and over again when you introduce people to the game. You can say, oh, hi, I'm Phil, I work for Ghost Town Games and I make Overcooked. So that sort of sticks in your brain a little bit. Actually, one of the abandoned ideas that we didn't go with was we were originally going to call the company Barbara Corp. We had this whole idea of branding the company as if a random middle-aged woman called Barbara had set up the studio in her spare time, and things had just started to get away from her. We had this whole elaborate backstory about her estranged husband, and anyway, I really love the idea, and I like to think that somewhere in an alternative universe, Barbara Corp are experiencing a lot of success. But anyway, in the end, we decided that we went for something that we both liked the sound of. There was also some other things like how easy it is to Google and making sure it doesn't clash with the name of some obscure Norwegian band or something that you hadn't thought about. So that's how we ended up calling the company Ghost Town Games, and our unnamed cooking game became Overcooked. So that was the first stage. Once we had the name, we set up all the various marketing outlets, so website, Twitter, email, all that kind of thing. And then finally, once we had that, we made a production plan and we started developing the game properly. So basically, those 3 points: the marketing side of things, the business side of things, and development. That's kind of indicative of how we spent our time over the course of the project. So as an independent developer, as I'm sure you're aware, you wear lots of different hats. So you find yourself jumping between all these different tasks, and you're probably doing it multiple times throughout the day. I mean, that's what we found. But one of the great bits of advice I got was that you should try to enjoy the marketing and the business side of things as much as you enjoy the development. Like it's so easy for you to just focus in on development because that's the bit you enjoy, it's the bit you're familiar with. But if you can sort of convince yourself that actually it's all part of the same job, it makes it a hell of a lot easier, I think.
Yeah, it's the whole thing of keeping it, essentially trying to think of the marketing as part of the game.
Yeah,
that's essentially
rather than like a completely separate entity. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's advice that I ignore on a daily basis, and I have to really convince myself. But like anytime I am doing admin work or marketing work, I just tell myself this is all part of the job. This is what it takes to be an independent developer, and somehow that just makes it all feel better. But yeah, so that's basically how we continued. We spent a lot of time developing the game. We spent a lot of time working on our Facebook and Twitter and tweeting about the game and marketing, and we also spent a lot of time setting up the business side of things, which takes us into the meat of production.
Yes. So, production. Hello again. There was a production plan. We had that very early on, a sort of overview milestone plan. We've done, as I say, development of games for 7 years before this, so we knew roughly the points we would need to hit. Part of that, though, whilst we had a production plan, it was about staying flexible. And to some extent, our roadmap was dictated by the availability of conventions. So we came to Norwich, we did Blackpool Play, we did some stuff at our local computer museum, and also integrating with other events. We started trying to build up, so as part of the marketing and external games development stuff, which I'm not going to get too detailed into, there was trying to build up an independent developer scene in Cambridge. Because there is an independent developer scene in Cambridge, but it was very scattered, and trying to bring those people in and trying to get, because eventually you're building up your support network at this point. You're trying to get all of the people, so if you're going to release on Xbox One, which we were intending to, as well as PlayStation 4, PC, you kind of want to know people who have those skills. You also want to get into ID Xbox early, because it's going to take a while for them to give you a dev kit. You want to get in touch with Sony early, and you want to try and get dev kits through them. And you want to basically reach out to everything you go. So we also reached out to the Anglia Ruskin, which is a university in Cambridge, because they do an art for games course, as well as their own programming courses and things. And that was a really good opportunity for us, partly to try to show the game, but it was also user testing. So we could go to them and we set them a module of art that they could produce using Overcooked as a brief, and they produced a lot of stuff in the first year course based off Overcooked, and Phil went and dealt with all of these things. I'm a coder. I went and sort of said, oh yeah, that's great, it's a nice colour. Yeah, we were involved in Anglia Ruskin, and that meant that we got user testing, which is fantastic, because obviously for our game, being a local co-op game of 4 players, there are 2 people developing it, and that does limit somewhat our ability to test our game.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't do that if you're thinking about developing a game with 2 people. You should maybe stick to 2 players.
Stick to 2 players. It makes more sense. Yeah, and sort of we could prioritise different things based on what came back from our conventions and user testing. So we realised, actually, interestingly, we thought that recipes and a lot of different variety of recipes were going to be really important in Overcooked, and it wasn't. What was really important was level design, because when it came down to it, when players played the game, they didn't really mind about the fact that they didn't really want new recipes. They were playing the level layouts, and they were just changing between lots of different level layouts that were the same recipe, and we were kind of like, oh, okay. So we reprioritized having more different varieties of levels, and focusing on level design being the focus of the game's mechanics rather than necessarily getting it all from the complexity of recipes. So that was a big thing for us. And yeah, you sort of you have to be very open-minded to getting you get a lot of negative responses or mixed responses, and you have to sort of internalize all of that and find what the priorities are. One of the big things that we got as a criticism, I hope I'm not leaping ahead into the talk here, but one of the things we got as a criticism was that the game was a casual game. I mean, it sounds like a criticism, was that people were dismissing it immediately as casual and not playable. So one of the things for us was redesigning the aesthetic to some extent of having lots of different. It sort of gave us the opportunity to go away from sort of traditional kitchen settings into a more sort of into some more surreal settings, having levels on pirate ships, having levels in hell, having levels in space, and sort of going out into those kind of more exotic locations, and then using more abstract mechanics as a result of that journey, because obviously the mechanics and the levels is what becomes a priority for Overcooked. So yeah, that was a sort of our journey through production, which kind of brings us onto our section on adapting, actually, I believe.
That's wonderful. That was a lovely, smooth transition. Thank you. So we got a lot of great feedback, and we started gaining some momentum with the various platform holders, because we'd reached out to them. Again, when we were sending out emails, we emailed absolutely everyone. So that was Xbox, Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony, basically anyone we could think of. Oh no, you have just done my bit. Never mind. I'll go into difficult decisions. So there was actually some. I kind of wanted to talk about this because it's something that a lot of people will gloss over when they talk about their independent development. It's something we hadn't heard a lot of, and it's that there are some really horrible decisions you have to make, both for the company and for the game. For example, we had an opportunity to demo the game at Paris Games Week, but because we were speaking to so many different platform holders, we actually had to turn that down because there was a possibility of doing an exclusivity deal, and it's something that we hadn't prepared for. But when you speak to people, they'll say, oh, we might have a potential deal for you, but I have to get my boss to sign off on it, or his boss's boss, and so you end up with this this horrible period where you can't make some decisions because you're waiting for someone else to make it. So that was the case. It was like, we had one of the platform holders said, right, you can come and be on our booth at Paris Game Week and we'll show you off. And we're like, that's fantastic, because that's, thousands of pounds it would have cost us to do that on our own. But at the same time, we had another platform holder that was saying, oh, but if we do an exclusivity deal, that would be off the table. So that was one thing that we had to turn down. And actually the biggest horrible decision we had to make was when we decided not to stagger the release of the game. Now, this was one that... having spoke to this wasn't just platform holders, we were speaking to publishers and friends and people who had the same sort of experience as us, and they actually advised us that rather than doing what we were going to do originally, which was stagger the release, we were planning to do the PC release in sort of October, November, and then we would bring out the Xbox and PlayStation at a later date. We were advised that actually simultaneous release is probably the best approach. So that meant that suddenly we were no longer releasing the game in October and November, we were pushing it back into 2016, and obviously delaying any potential earnings we could be making in that time. Now, what I will say is that that's something that when we first started out in January, February last year, would have been horrifying to us. But I think over the course of the year, we gained so much more confidence in the game and confidence in ourselves to actually deliver it, that I don't know, it's an example of that, how you have to adapt and how you will change your thinking based from the start. So don't necessarily think that you're going to come up with a plan when you first start out and you're going to stick to it stringently, because in actual fact you have to be a lot more flexible with that. What else we got? And yeah, we'll let you know whether that was a good decision or not, really. So we're currently planning is to bring the game out on Xbox and PlayStation, so we're in the process of going through all their certification and things like that. And hopefully in the next few weeks we'll be able to talk about how we're releasing it, and on what platforms and with who. And then we're on to the next section, which I can't actually read. A new year, 2016.
Excellent. So I think we're talking about the marketing side of things at this point. So yeah, the part of the adaptability was, and the whole process was trying to contact as many people as possible and try and get that support network down. And we were very lucky. So originally we were trying to contact publishers because we became aware of the fact that the marketing and PR and business side of things was kind of getting on top of us. There's this classic paradigm that I heard from another programmer that comes from the 1980s, which is the idea you need the hacker, the hipster, and the hustler when you develop any piece of software. The hipster being, of course, the artist and designer, so that would be you in this scenario, and the hacker being the coder and technical side of things, and then you need somebody who is going to sell it. And we didn't really think of that as being a full-time job. We kind of thought, oh, we'll make this game, it'll be a really nice game, it'll be really good, and then it'll just sell itself. But of course, with the massive amount of indie developers now, that is incredibly naive. And what you really need to do is get the word out about your game to as many people as possible. And there is also a side of that is just managing your social media and is managing your emails with conventions and with publishers, and also accounting and other basically non-production development. So yeah, we were looking at publishers. One of the publishers we contacted in the early days was Double Fine, because they publish indie development stuff, and they kind of got back to us and said, "Oh, we're kind of busy right now. We got a lot of these kind of like, oh, actually, we're not taking people on." But they said they'd be offered to do some user testing. And so when it came around to, I can't remember exactly what time of year this was. Was this January or was this late last year?
No, it's January time.
It's January time. So in January time, we finally were at a point where we wanted to send out builds to particular people to sort of get some user testing feedback. So we were doing some of our own events where we would bring people over and we would take some notes and do some balancing. And we remembered Double Fine and we sent them a build. One of the pieces of advice that I got so I went to a talk at Rezzed last year by Mike Bithell, and he was talking about getting presence on YouTube, because obviously YouTube now is a huge way for indie developers. It's pretty much the principal way of marketing your game if you're an indie developer, is to get people doing Let's Play videos. And one of the pieces of advice he had was that it's very important to put a disclaimer on your product to say that the video content that is taken from your game is available to be used in whatever way that they need to use it, so that they don't have the problem of worrying about whether or not they're going to get any kind of legal problem for using your footage or your music or whatever in their videos. So we put a big disclaimer on the front of our game and then forgot about it. And so when we sent the build to Double Fine for what we just assumed was user testing, they'd read the disclaimer page and been like, oh, cool, and we'll just put it on our Twitch channel. And so we had this build just go up on Double Fine's Twitch channel, which was amazing. And that was just before our Greenlight campaign, and that was then, having done that, we could then use that footage, take that footage, put it up on our YouTube channel as well, and start sending out emails to journalists. And it's really useful when you're talking to journalists to be able to say, oh, and Double Fine played our game, because journalists obviously receive thousands of emails from indie developers, and you kind of need some kind of to be like, oh, this is why, listen to. So we got some Eurogamer articles, and we got some coverage on. We got into Kotaku's things to watch out for in the UK list, and a lot of other journalist coverage, and that was all really important for us into getting the game out. And so that's kind of been our new year, has been this sort of frantic management now of trying to get press coverage with the game, building up to get through a Greenlight campaign. So we then put off our game on Greenlight, and we've now, fortunately, I can say that we've worked through Greenlight successfully. It's not always a clean process, that. And so yeah, that was essentially our new year was this whole marketing thing. And now we're at the point where we're sort of finalising the console side of development, because as Phil said, people were very insistent that simultaneous release was the only way to go. And so we're now doing the Xbox One special. The one thing I would recommend to developers who are planning to do any kind of console release is to find somebody who has done it before. That's the big piece of advice, and to ask them questions, because the documentation isn't always perfect, and it's really useful to be able to skip through that process by having to just fire some questions at another developer. And the other is to start it early, because it does take months to, even with Unity, which is our engine of choice, it does still take a month to do controller sign in and saving to the right place and rich presence. You just have to do some rich presence work, and the whole achievements and the back end social stuff, which is all a requirement for certification. So it's very important to get on that. I wouldn't do it before you've got your game sort of set. It's still important to have a good game that is fun, but it's very important to be aware that time is going to come at the end of your development. It's why it's been useful for us to talk to publishers, because publishers obviously have those resources. And that kind of brings us to current dev, and then we'll do some QA.
Is there anything written there? No, I think you've sort of covered it there. That's kind of the state we're in at the minute. And the other thing I would say just there is that having emailed out to every to all the websites and publishers and things, it was journalists. Yeah, that's the word.
That's what you're looking for.
Having messaged all of them and then starting to build some momentum. I think that's kind of introduced some more opportunities for us. So again, that's a kind of incentive to do that, is that just having more people aware of the game means that publishers just have a little bit more faith, and it gives them a little bit more security that they can actually sell your game, because just sending them a build and then just playing it, they can see that it's good, but if they see that actually, in fact, we've got a little bit of build up on Twitter, or you've been speaking to some people from Kotaku or whoever it is, that just is just a little push. It's just anything you can do basically to make your product look appealing to them, I think is
Screenshot Saturdays and anything you can do to sort of get coverage, essentially. It's like Twitter and Facebook and all that.
Yes, that's about it. I'm sure. That was 12 months condensed into about probably 10 minutes. I'm not sure, but if there's any other questions, I'm sure there's some big parts that we skipped over. It would be great to hear them, and we will strive to answer them as best we can. Anything?
Did you actually find a band called Barbara Corp?
No, we're actually starting a band called Barbara Corp as part of the No, thankfully, but it was really touch and go. We were quite close for it. I had the logo in my head and everything, but no, ultimately we decided we'll go a little bit
Out of
safer.
interest, how many people in this room are indie developers or thinking of developing games? Just a raise of hands. That'd be
Okay.
cool. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Good. Anything else?
Best of luck.
I've got a quick one.
Yes.
This is one of the early decisions you had to make, but the choice to go kind of couch co-op, local co-op, as opposed to multiplayer online co-op, was that more based around the experience you wanted to create, or was it due to technical limitations?
So the question there, sorry, I'm just repeating it for the stream, was why do we base our decision? Why do we go local co-op rather than online multiplayer? I think part of it was because that was the kind of games we were playing at the time and the kind we really enjoyed and missed. Another part of it, I would say, is like technically when there's just two of you, that's a big lot of work doing online multiplayer. But mainly it's just that the experience of cooperation that we were going for, it just made so much more sense to be in the same room and to all be staring at the same screen. And I think that was basically the experience we were cultivating. So again, that was at the core of the design, basically.
Yeah. I think it basically comes down to that thing I was saying at the start of the talk about prioritizing what you think is the most critically important part of your game. If we'd have spent time on online, I know from having done some online games in the past that it tends to mean that 50% of your time is spent in networking, code integration. So if that's really important to you, then you do that. But if you think that the experience really isn't benefited by that, then you have to just go, okay, no, that we won't do. I mean, we're not saying rule it out forever, but we're saying like that's not our high priority. Our high priority is what can we do in a local co-op setting and add as many features as we can in local co-op, and then see where that leaves us, basically. So you do the most important features first, so that if you have to drop features, they aren't the features that actually mattered, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Anything else?
Sure.
This is eager to ask a question. I think I've got two in mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Besides the location of like outer space and that sort of thing, do you have any sort of inspiration from any specific recipes of cuisines like Chinese, Japanese, Indian, that sort of thing, or did you just pick up from the personal favourites of yours?
Yeah. So I'll repeat the question. if I can. Wow, it just goes from your brain. Basically, was there any influence on the recipes that we put in the game, or was it just personal preference? And I guess a lot of it comes down to gameplay, because again, we were going for this core experience of cooperation. So for us, it was taking recipes that were quite simple. It's quite important that people coming to it have a sort of rough idea of how that thing is made in real life. So most people know roughly how to make a pizza. They know you roll out dough and you add tomato and you add cheese and that kind of thing. And the same with like burgers, and we've got soup in there, which, although our version of soup is you cut up 3 onions, you put them in a pan for 30 seconds, and that's soup. But we also did want to have quite a variety of orders though, so we didn't want it all to just be, you know, American fast food. So we do have things in there. We've got fish and chips, for example, and yeah. So I think that was the most important thing to us, was just making sure it was things that were simple, and also things that didn't have a huge number of constituent parts. It was like,
whereas the UI was a large problem.
yeah. So you need to communicate really quickly to the player what they need to do. So we couldn't have this long, big list of recipes and steps for it. So we needed things that were very simple, which is why, like, making a pizza is you chop up cheese, you chop up tomato, you
It also
bash
has
dough.
tasks that parallelize well. So it has to be that, you know, with a pizza, there are 4 tasks that can all be done in parallel. Whereas if you're making a cake, there's no, you know, it's kind of a one-path structure, which makes it less suitable to a cooperative game.
And second, but probably most important,
Mm-hmm.
with the recent amount of games that have been, once, you know, especially like the problems we're seeing now of AAA games being released, and then we had their problems with being buggy glitches released on launch day. Are you two guys going to be confident that you'll iron out all the bugs and everything else in the programming, and make sure that when you get on release date, it's all ironed out and good, ready to go?
Yeah. Okay. So the question there is: are we confident that there will be minimal bugs or no bugs in the game? Yes.
100%. Not a single bug.
It's definitely been quite tricky for us to do QA and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's why we're sort of keen to court publishing deals.
So as an indie developer, you have limitations. You don't have a QA department. And that makes us more vulnerable to the possibility that the game doesn't work. The other thing is PC compatibility testing. Because as an independent developer, we have 2 bad laptops in which we're developing this game, rather than a suite of different hardware that we could test.
Graphics cards and all that kind of thing.
That partly is why we were interested in publisher partnerships, so that we had access to those 2 things. But even without that, I think the sort of, if we were to give a sort of single message of this talk, it's to reach out to as many people as possible in as many different places as possible as an indie developer. You need friends to play your game, you need conventions to test your game, and you need just the sort of the widest variety of skills on which to ask questions about that kind of topic. And also PC hardware, you need people who've got different PCs in order to give them builds and test.
What I would say is slightly different for us compared to when we were working in industry is that what you generally find with bigger games is that you work on it for 12, 18 months, and then you have 2 months of intense QA at the end, whereas we sort of had a full game much faster than we would have if we'd been in industry, so there was a lot more testing as we went along. So that's given us a bit more confidence in that, should I say. But yeah, 100% confident.
Yeah, no bugs, there'll be no bugs. That's fine.
Any other questions? Oh, hello.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right,
right.
we'll wrap it up there then. But thank you very much, everyone, for your time. Yeah, and Overcooked comes out in the next few months. So.
Please go and play it.
Oh yeah, and it's on the store on Steam, so wishlist it and everything. Thank you.